Thank you for joining us here today. Hope you've been having a great time at the summit. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I know it's getting late in the day, so feel free to ask questions, be interactive. We've got a great panel here for you today. We'll start off with a round of quick introductions. My name is Ryan Rodriguez-Wiggins. I'm a senior director here at MetricStream, working in sales and account management. To my right is Sonal Sinha, a partner at PwC, one of our partners downstairs in the vendor exhibit area. We've also got Kelley, Okolita, and Bonnie Frank joining us. Bonnie is a vice president of enterprise risk and crisis management at PSP Investments, and Kelley is a director of disaster management services at Cambia Health Solutions. Both have years of experience, lots of great stories that we're going to hear today. So very excited for the panel that we have. I'd like to start off similar to how I start off many of my demonstrations to just kind of set the stage a little bit. This is a quote I like to use when talking about business continuity management. He who fails to plan is planning to fail. I think it's a quote from over 100 years ago that's still very prudent and important today, right? All of our organizations rely on continuity to continue to provide our clients with success and successful products. Especially in this day and age where we've got so many different vendors across the world. Everybody's such a global firm that it's extremely important to think about business continuity management and how that plays into the overall risk management program and your overall goals and visions for your firm. So with that, I'll pass it over to the panelists to just quickly introduce themselves and also just to give a little bit more about why BCM and what really how you got involved and what makes it tick for you. So with that, we can start with Bonnie here.
Sure. So my name is Bonnie Frank, and as Ryan mentioned, I run the crisis management program at PSP Investments. We're a global pension fund for the Canadian Armed Forces, the Royal Mounted Police, as well as the civil servants. We operate in New York, London, as well as Montreal, where we're based, and we have investments all over the world. So for us, crisis management is everything that can affect our home base, but also anywhere where we have investments, and that would be essentially in most of the countries within our globe. So for us, for business continuity, what we're looking for is not just taking that perspective that my IT systems are going to run, although it's a very important aspect of it, but making sure that we have the word, resiliency. Are we resilient enough where people can operate no matter where they may be, either based in the world or traveling for that period? And also looking at it from a point of view, is the company itself resilient to be able to be able to turn on the lights the next day if need be, and if we're not able to do that, can we operate from various areas? How are we going to be able to manage that, continue the business line, and eventually recover back to a normal state? So that's a bit the overview of the function that we're looking at.
Hi, I'm Kelley Okolita, and Cambia Health Solutions is the Blue Cross Blue Shield plan in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Utah. And I am the director of Cambia Disaster Management Services, which basically means I am Cambia's gloom and doom queen. That's my job, is to be the gloom and doom queen of Cambia. I've been doing this for a really long time. I actually started my career at Fidelity Investments, probably before most of you were born. And I was actually the 347th employee of Fidelity Investments back in 1976. And when I left, there were 34,000 of those folks, and including 4 of my sons. So I started, I actually worked for Fidelity on September 11th, had 850 people across the street from the towers in New York, and spent 9 weeks in New Jersey supporting Fidelity's recovery from that event. And I'm not sure who had the harder time, me in New Jersey for 9 weeks or my husband home alone with the 11 children for 9 weeks. So, and then I left Fidelity and went to work for a property and casualty insurance company, got to experience Katrina firsthand because, they just follow me wherever I go. And so the Pacific Northwest is really hoping that's not going to happen this time because that wouldn't be fun. But as I said, my job is to scare people, make sure that they're prepared, they actually take action in being prepared. I have 3 whole people who work for me. I operate across 5 states and 10 major sites, and so my job is to make people scared enough that they take action and be prepared within their space, within their area of responsibility, and whether that's a life safety preparedness, a personal safety preparedness, incident management, crisis management, business continuity, disaster recovery, the whole gamut. And we have teams at every level in the organization that dotted line to me. As a matter of fact, I was at a conference, management conference with the leaders in the organization, and I mentioned, that I have, there's 3 whole people that work for me, and we deliver all this stuff. And one of the regional presidents said, "Kelley, don't we all work for you?" And in a sense, they do in this particular space, because everybody needs to understand their role. I'll end with this. I presented before a lot of board of directors, and usually when I start with a company, I've been brought in to solve a problem, and usually when we get to the end of what the problem is and how we're going to solve it, usually someone on the board says, "So how do you know when you're done?" And I said, "Well, business continuity disaster recovery is a program. It's not a project. It doesn't have a beginning and a middle and an end, but I can tell you when you have a good program. How you can tell if you have a good program? Well, let's pretend you all work for my company right now, and the fire alarms are going off, okay, and everybody's going to follow their little floor warden out of the building and go to your assembly area, get accounted for. No one dies or anything like that, but it's really clear when you're standing outside the building that you are not getting back into this space today. Does everybody in this room know what to do next? Because that's how you know you have a good program, because every single person is supposed to know what they're supposed to do next when they can't do business the way they normally do. So, thanks.
Sonal, do you want to give a quick introduction as well?
Sure. So good afternoon. My name is Sonal Sinha, and I'm a partner at PwC, specifically in client services. So I help clients build their GRC programs, all the way from defining what that encompasses, the people, process, technology, and change management and user adoption. Prior to PwC, I was at MetricStream, so it's nice to be back here at the summit again. And as many of you know, PwC is a global professional services organization, over 300,000 employees globally. So employees and people are our only asset, and they walk out that door every evening. So business continuity management, crisis management is extremely important, because that's the only way we drive revenue. That's the business that we're in the people business. And from that perspective, I can say that there are 2 lenses that I have. One is, how do we make sure that we're continuously delivering to our clients when there are disasters around, which could happen anywhere around the world, right? And secondly, how do we help our clients build their BCM and their crisis management programs so that they're protecting their assets? And looking forward to a very engaging session here.
Excellent. Thank you, Sonal. So you bring up a couple good points. We've heard a little bit about, building out a program, talking about the people factor. Bonnie, you told us a story when you were on the phone about working within the Cayman Islands. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how the people plays into that?
Yeah. So I'm based in Montreal, Canada, and we were actually the recovery center when I worked at Aon in the insurance area for the Cayman Islands. And during that period, we had a lot of expats there, either from Canada or the U.S. There was quite a bit of hurricane activity going on there, and we actually became their recovery site. At the time, what we learned quickly was a recovery plan is great, and it's very easy to set up a couple of computers in a boardroom, but we didn't recognize that a lot of people weren't going to leave their family behind in the Cayman Islands and take on a flight up to Canada. Spouses, children were coming with them as well. That was not factored into the plans back then. Neither were some issues such as, although they were recovering in Montreal, they may have been part of U.S. operations. Not all our systems were hooked up. So while they could be operational, they weren't necessarily tapping into the right databases. And then lastly, of course, the weather played a big factor. So if you're living in the Cayman Islands and you come up to Montreal, Canada in the wintertime, you are going to be very ill-prepared dress-wise for the weather. So we actually had people bringing in extra coats, snowsuits for children who were really coming with basically summer clothes. So it was really taking that word resiliency again, moving away a bit from a disaster recovery back in the time when it was mostly IT technology focused, and saying how are we actually going to be able to carry on business. Those were some very good lessons learned, and I think the first time that we actually started to expand plans that really looked at what are you actually going to do with that human factor? Can you ask people to relocate where they may have families, like in a Katrina situation? How realistic is that? And if people do relocate, how are you accommodating for the people that may come with them, and as well as what they're dealing with at home on a personal level? So that's also some other factors that we took into. And one other one that we talked about, which Kelley mentioned as well, was when I was at Aon, most of the Canadians were expats from our company who were killed at 9/11 with the Twin Towers. And I think the Twin Towers were really, unfortunately, a catastrophic area where continuity, resiliency, crisis management, and how do you really plan for those events? I think those are an example of something you can't plan for necessarily, but you can see that having had some other plans, everything as basic as contact lists of people, plans for who would contact families, which wasn't always clear when there's personal relationships. So just the basics, I think it really came to the forefront of moving past just that disaster recovery technology portion and really having a resilient plan, where, as Kelley said, where people actually knew, okay, if we take a step back, what are the next steps that we have to do, and not doing it on the fly as we were handling situations.
Excellent, thank you. And Kelley, could you elaborate on that a little bit as well? You mentioned Katrina and also 9/11. Tell us more about the people factor and your thoughts there.
I'll tell you that disasters are human events, and I'll also tell you that IT recovery is pretty easy. And by easy, I don't mean that it's not complex, because technology is a complex thing. But technology either works or it doesn't, right? And how well you recover your technology environment is entirely dependent upon two things: how much money you're willing to spend, and how often you test. Okay? That's all it depends on, because technology is very black and white. It's either on or off. It either works or it doesn't. All right? People recovery is not on or off. All right, because people have families. September 11th, my 850 people in New York, we had 2 recovery facilities that we had been testing in for 5 years, 4 times a year, with people, business recovery, not technology recovery. There was a technology component as well, but it was really about testing the ability for the business to operate in a different environment than they normally did. Well, we had 2. One was a recovery facility and a contracted facility in New Jersey. The other was an internal facility in Merrimack, New Hampshire. And the reason why we had a certain amount of groups going to Merrimack, New Hampshire was because, number one, the New Jersey site was a first come, first serve, as most recovery facilities are that you contract for. And secondly, because we had direct point-to-point circuits between Fidelity and a vendor at the time. And it was 2001, not 2018, okay? So moving those circuits was difficult, and we did not want to duplicate that circuit into a site we weren't guaranteed to be in. So instead, we had them recover in Merrimack, New Hampshire. Well, no one except Kelley was going anywhere September 11th, okay? By the time I got to the recovery facility in New Jersey, which is the one I managed, the whole environment was built out because we tested 4 times a year. And one of the tech people was available, went to the site, built it out. I was the 3rd person. I got there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on September 11th. I was the 3rd person to make it to the site because you couldn't get out of New York that day, right? So if you were in New York, you were either walking across a bridge because all the tunnels were closed, the subways were shut down, the buses were shut down, everything stopped. You could not get out of New York. The first people from New York did not arrive in the site until after 6 o'clock that night, covered in dust and debris. So September 11th, we had maybe 30 people at the site by the end of the day. September 12th, when managers started talking to employees about going to Merrimack, New Hampshire, now remember, they tested there 4 times a year. They knew that's where they were going. They knew that that's their recovery facility. The vast majority of them said, fire me if you want to, but I am not leaving my family. Not.
Yeah, and if I could add, I think that it's a difficult conversation to have sometimes with senior management, but I think it's that human, realistic touch. You can have great plans, but we also have a duty of care to our employees, and I think part of that duty of care is when you have an event like September 11th, like Katrina, is it realistic to ask employees, and how much do you want to ask of them at that time? Even if employees more had gone to that site, are they able to function, right? Are you causing them more harm by asking them to leave families, putting that pressure? If there's a natural disaster, are you putting your employees in danger, essentially, by asking them to go to secondary sites? And it's a difficult thing to raise to management to say these plans are great, but are they realistic? Are they feasible? Are they opening the company up to potential also liability issues by putting these demands on people? And realistically, what are you putting pressure on your employees during certain periods of time that you may get responses like that, fire me if you have to. But so I think the plans have to take that into account and plan accordingly for that when your people are not going to be as mobile as we may have hoped for.
Yep. I mean, Katrina was a similar situation where we had people that were in an office in New Orleans that was closed for a month. And some of them, obviously, during Katrina, you have a different situation. People scattered. People left the area, and where all those phone numbers you have for them, they're not working. Because, you need power to use a cell phone. And if people had their cell phones with them, they were putting them on just periodically to check things. They were not leaving them on full time. So getting a hold of people was difficult. But we had people that said, sure, I'd be happy to go to Atlanta to work, but I have to bring my spouse, my 3 children, my 2 dogs, my cat, my bird, and my mother-in-law. And if you can make room for all those people, I'll be happy to go work out of the Atlanta office. And that's reality. I will tell you that on 9/11, we did not lose anybody, but everybody at least knew somebody. Everybody at least knew somebody. One guy told me he had 52 people from his hometown were missing in the towers. People you do Little League with and Cub Scouts with and stuff like that. But the people who actually came to the recovery facility, because nobody has a recovery facility that fits all of your staff, right? You do your essential staff. So we had, by market open on that following Monday, we had 385 people dense packed in a space that was designed for 225 people. So you can imagine you had just about as much room as a keyboard to work, and it was very, very close. And so we started getting, this is the human factor, right? You started getting, I can't sit next to him anymore, he's mean to me. Or, he really needs to shower. And then, but the first couple of weeks, it was a lot of rah, go team, we're Fidelity, they're not going to take us down. But after a couple of weeks of literally having no personal space in the office, people who lived on Long Island, okay, which was a large number of people. People who work in New York, they take public transportation, okay? Now they're going to New Jersey. Some of them don't have cars. Some of them don't have driver's licenses, okay? So we actually had a transportation plan where we picked people up at gathering points where they normally would gather to go to work in the city. So subway stations, train stations, bus stations in various locations. And then we brought them to the recovery facility in New Jersey. 2.5 hours each way from Long Island, every day. You know how long we were in that recovery facility? 15 months, okay? But after 2 weeks, we started getting a lot of medicals, right? People having heart palpitations, people having panic attacks, because the stress finally caught up with them. Going to wakes and funerals every night, hearing about another person that was lost in the towers. Disasters are human events. If you don't plan for the humans, they're not going to be there for you because you didn't account for them as you made your plans.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that the human element is extremely important. In addition to that, what we're also seeing is that clients want to make sure that their business, their revenue stream is not impacted. And, knowing your vendors, your suppliers, especially when, say, you have only one main supplier and they're probably, flooded, and your backup supplier is not up and running, cannot deliver for you, or is just not aware that they have to start, producing the amount of quantity you need because you only have 2 suppliers. So knowing your suppliers is an extremely important component, especially when it comes to managing your business and planning for the worst.
Absolutely. Fidelity actually had a supplier, a bank, a custodian bank, and I will not mention the bank, but they were recovering in the same facility I was in, and I actually knew the guy who ran their recovery program because we're a very incestuous business continuity, and so we all know each other. And he was staying in the same hotel, recovering in the same facility, and I felt really bad for this guy because not only did they lose a data center, And they lost a major communications hub, so basically a telecommunications center for their organization. But they also lost people. They lost a couple people in the towers. And so he was struggling really hard. And I felt, on a personal level, I felt really bad for him. Fidelity was angry because for weeks they could not tell us how much money we had and where it was and how to get it. And so, vendor, as you look at suppliers, vendors, whatever you want to call them, we actually have a very strong vendor management program of which I am a part. Business continuity cares about vendors from the standpoint of they can put us out of business. The right vendor can put us out of business, particularly single source and sole source suppliers. So we want to make sure that we as an organization, and so I have a team of people from internal audit, from vendor management, from IT vendor management, from information security, from compliance, and from operations, and from my team that are part of a vendor risk management team that looks at, first thing we did when we decided this was important was figure out what makes a vendor risky, okay, what vendors do we care about, because we have thousands of vendors, which ones do we want to actually care about, what makes them risky, how risky are they, what kind of data do we share with them, what kind of impact would they have on our organization if they were unable to recover from their business, and then what kind of strategy should we put in place to monitor their capabilities, both from all of those risk areas, whether it's information security, whether it's financial, how financially healthy the organization is, whether its ability to recover in a disaster, how well they manage and our data that we share with them, et cetera. So all of that about your vendors, because I will tell you, your customers don't care. Customers don't care. Customers do not care that this is a vendor who messed up. Customers only are going to point to you, that you're responsible. You contracted with this person. You're responsible for making sure that this vendor can do what they committed to you that they will do on your behalf to support me as a customer. We actually had 2 9/11s in a row where Fidelity suffered catastrophic losses of buildings. The first September 11th of 2000, we lost 3 buildings in the Dallas region because of a water main break. Buildings were fine, but 1,600 people were in those buildings. And believe me, you do not want to work in a building with 1,600 people with no flushing toilets. It's not a good thing. So we actually went to our recovery facility. We were only there for a couple of days until they fixed the water main, et cetera. September 11th of 2001, clearly we were in our recovery facility for 15 months. We were in our disaster recovery facility first and then an interim recovery facility after that. How many of you guys are Fidelity customers? And through your IRA, your 401k, did you notice? That's the whole point of a business continuity and disaster recovery program. You don't want your customers to notice that you have a problem.
Excellent. So that actually gets into kind of where I wanted to go next in terms of setting up your organization and how the BCM program looks within the organization. I think a lot of what we just spoke about proves and points out that risk management is not, nor should it be, a check-the-box activity, right? This is very, very real, what we're discussing and what we're talking about. And for those of you who are familiar with Basel or have done operational risk within your roles, putting up here on the slide the Basel operational risk categories. And you'll notice here EDPM, execution, delivery, and process management. Vendor risk, when this came out 17 years ago, was a subset of operational risk, right? And we think about, speaking of vendors and suppliers and how critical it is now. This team, which used to be, maybe a handful of people, if you were lucky, is now a whole area, right? A whole discipline that we're looking at. Similarly, BCM, damage to physical assets, business disruption. These are entire areas and teams, right? The world has changed substantially in the past 20 years, let's say. So with that, how are your programs structured in terms of where does BCM report within the organization, as well as how that plays into vendor risk? And I'll segue to the audience. How many of you, by show of hands, BCM falls within enterprise risk or reports in through the CRO? A few of you, about half. How many does it report into the CISO or the technology side of the organization? A few of you. Any others reporting structures?
I report to HR. How's that for weird?
So clearly, depending on where you are and what firm, there's a variety of different ways to approach this. So I'll pass it back over to the panelists to talk a little bit more about the structure and how the teams really work together from a risk standpoint.
Let me start. Like I said, I have 3 old people who work for me. So obviously I work through a distributed organization across Cambia. For every business line, on the business continuity side, for every business line that we have, for every site that they're located in, there's a business continuity planner whose job it is to document, and this is not their full-time job, this is, oh, by the way, in your spare time while you're not doing anything else job, document how they would recover or continue that particular business operation should that site become unavailable. So that's their first job, is the site is unavailable. Within each site that we have a local incident response team that is responsible for making decisions at a site level, because I don't need every individual. I may have 25 business lines within a site, and so I want decisions to be made at a site level, even in something as simple as a weather event. We got 5 inches of snow on the ground. Are we going to open? Are we going to close? Are we going to delay start? That kind of stuff. So I want those decisions made at a site level, but we actually practice with the local incident response teams. We meet with them 4 times a year. We do 2 exercises with them a year. We include the business continuity planners from the site. We also have a corporate incident management team, which is the president of the company and his direct reports, and a couple of other people that are part of the incident management program as well. We meet with them 4 times a year. We do 2 tabletops with them every year. We actually have one next week, next Tuesday, and we're actually doing an information security event as this particular scenario this time around. But the whole point is, there's also a team of people that are doing the life safety side. So I have a safety officer and a lead floor warden in every building. They're responsible for making sure we have enough floor wardens and assembly coordinators. I go out and train them all. We give them hard hats and whistles and flashlights, and so they look like vests. They look like they're in charge. And we train them on basic protective actions like evacuation, shelter in place, earthquake, that kind of stuff. And we actually they're responsible for making sure we do certain types of drills depending on the location, because obviously Pacific Northwest is much more likely to have an earthquake than a hurricane. They really don't get them there. My office in Dallas is much more likely to get a tornado. So they do specific life safety drills with the teams, with the whole building in every site to make sure people know it. We also do a lot of workplace violence, prevention and mitigation planning, and response planning with what we call our Blue Alert team, or Blue Plan. So it's Blue Alert team. So we talk about run, hide, fight, and protective actions, and et cetera, and those types of scenarios as well. So that's how I report through HR. That's a really dumb place to be, but I love my boss. He's great. But until most of you, about half of you, report up through the risk organization, which is where it belongs. Okay, enterprise risk really should. And I do have I'm part of the enterprise risk management committee. We do have an enterprise risk manager, but that's she's way up there doing strategic risk. She's not thinking of business continuity being in her domain. But in mature organizations, business continuity and disaster recovery and physical security and information security and all of those risk areas, vendor risk, all of those bubble up to the enterprise risk management group, which is where they belong as an organizational. Make sure that we're addressing all of those risks as we touch, because we all have the same goal. Information security cares about different types of risks than I do, but we all have the same goal: keep the business running. Right?
Definitely. And Bonnie?
So I'm part of the Enterprise Risk Management Group, reporting into the Chief Risk Officer. Business continuity did report into risk. It now reports into the Chief Operating Officer. However, we run the crisis management program. So every group responsible for an area of potential crises or major incidents reports through crisis and are part of our plan. So that'll be emergency response, who does our evacuations, our floor wardens, business continuity We also have under that piece that we're responsible for travel security, and as well as managing at the executive level, corporate level, for that strategic guidance when we're past that incident, but we're heading potentially onto that crisis area. I think that what we've done is we've taken our enterprise risk management framework, we've applied it to business continuity. So we use the same framework for business continuity, we use the same framework for crisis management and travel management as well. And I think that has proven to be very successful, because what it does is allows us to look at it from that higher corporate level. So, you know, at our individual offices, we have site-specific plans for business continuity. We have mini crisis management teams because, like you said, Kelley, a lot of decisions have to be made on site. There's time differences sometimes as well. But they all have to report eventually into the corporate office, and to make sure that we're looking at, are we identifying, have we assessed the risk from all the potential areas, so people, operations, legal, regulatory, strategic, are we taking all that into account? And that's done at the corporate level through enterprise risk management. So to make sure that that holistic view is being had, while individually on site they're managing the incidents themselves hands-on, and that you have the right subject matter experts, but you have that strategic executive guidance coming in. So that is the way that we focused on it.
Excellent, thank you.
And just to add to that, so, you know, I guess we're in a little bit of a unique situation, because in client service, it's not a good thing to be in the office. So most of us are at client sites or away from the office. Of course, there are administrative staff in the office who, you know, are the office, you know, escalation points and wear the blue hats and the red jackets. But technology plays a very important component in our line of business, especially where the people are, because your employees could be on an airplane. They could be at a client location in the same city they're based out of, or in a different state altogether. So where are your assets? Where are your employees? The second place technology plays a big part is, how do those employees access information regardless of where they are? I mean, perhaps the data center is down, their main data center, but you know, where's the backup data center? How is it up and running very quickly? So the mobility is extremely important. The organization has BCM apps that are delivered through your mobile devices, iPads, computers. Testing is very, very regular, of course, to make sure that you can be contacted no matter where you are, online, offline mode. You know, again, there's a heavy reliance on technology to be able to drive business continuity and resiliency. Mm-hmm.
If you don't mind, I'm going to give you all and we could do it if I thought to bring a deck of cards with me, but I didn't. So we're just going to imagine this. Okay, well, I speak at a lot of conferences. I've been doing this for a really long time. But I'll give you a really quick incident management, business continuity exercise that kind of brings home why this is important. All right, so let's assume that each one of you, when you came in here, had a card, just a regular old playing card. And I asked you right now, turn the card over, and I want you to assemble, when I tap my mic, or clap my hands, whatever, I want you to assemble in the four corners of the room by suit and pick a leader. Okay, go. Right? Just imagine, you know, there's a lot of hearts. No, we're not hearts, we're diamonds. No, hearts are over here. Oh, all right. But it's a lot of people going all over the place. But eventually people end up in the corner, and then I go, did you pick a leader? Oh, yeah, we got to pick a leader. I'll be the leader. Okay, no, I want to be a leader. All right, whatever. So usually when you do that with a room full of people, it takes, you know, 2-3 minutes for people to get settled in the corners. And then I say, all right, everybody go back to your desk. And then I hand out the aces to 4 people. I said, okay, you're the leader of the diamonds, the hearts, the clubs, and the spades. And now when I clap my hands again, I want the diamonds to assemble here, the clubs here, the hearts here, and the spades here. Okay, you ready? Clap my hands. Everybody just goes to their corner. That, my friends, is the difference between having a plan and not having a plan. Eventually, you will get to your corners and figure out who's in charge, but it's so much easier if you already know that in advance. If you already have that part down. Right?
Very good. We've got about 20 minutes or so left, and I want to turn it over to the audience. I've got a number of questions we can continue to go through, but any questions, thoughts from the crowd here? Anybody? Are you seeing similar things in your organizations? in terms of the way that you're looking at processes, et cetera? All right. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Hi. So there's obviously correlating risks in the BIA from business impact assessment and operational risk. Yeah? Often they operate in two different silos. How do you manage to pull those together to manage certain risks as enterprise?
Yep, so the question for the folks in the room is, correct me if I'm wrong, you've got the BIA generally being managed by one area, risk assessments and other processes being kind of evaluated separately, and how do you kind of manage that disparity, I guess?
So one thing that we've done is when we were doing the BIA, so every group has what we call business continuity coordinator. They're responsible for filling in the BIAs. We took the business processes that were done by another group so that people would see we're talking to each other, we're using information already done, and use that to determine what were the critical business processes that needed to be recovered and what essentially could be shut down. Now, no one likes to say, okay, my process can be shut down, but eventually we get to that point. So through those BIAs, we also have them approved by the department head at the end of the day, because there's going to be a cost associated with recovery. And you can spend, sky's the limit on recovery, but what you want to make sure is, like Kelley said, do you know who your top 5 business partners, vendors are? What are your top 5 critical processes that absolutely have to be recovered, so that whether it's your clients, your shareholders, your stakeholders, at the end of the day, don't feel a difference in them. So that's how we've linked it up. We also have committees where we bring different units, so the IT portion in terms of operational from technological, the business continuity coordinators in the departments, so that they can actually have that live feed. Is there something particular going on in a business unit when something happens? They're going to be the ones who are going to know that. And as well, being right away to know who your critical departments are, linking them together, making sure that that information is shared across the company. So whether it's IT, business continuity, risk management, treasury, if we have funds going in or out of the company, and even the ones who deal with our vendors or custodians, right away those top 5 critical either business processes or groups are already identified. Everybody knows who they are, and those are the ones that are going to sort of get that gold-plated treatment on it. Did that answer?
Kelley, you mentioned that you have 3 employees, right? Is this by design, or throughout your career you manage just with limited amount of people? I have noticed that too, whether enough resources are being invested in these disaster recovery programs, right? It is more like, just like you said before, in your downtime, whenever you are not doing your day job, can you please do this, right? That's number 1. And also number 2, in your career, how successful were you to convince the senior management to do an end-to-end disaster recovery planning in real time, right? Bring everything down and see how we perform.
All right, in terms of working through a distributed organization, my experience has been that I can, I tell my planners that I can build them an alternate site, right? And I can put technology, I can put them a desktop and a phone and a fax machine or whatever else they might need to work. And I can figure out how to get them there. Like I can do the logistics of getting them from wherever they are to wherever they need to be. But what I can't tell them is how to run their business with 30 people instead of 300. And so it's very important that the people who live and breathe this every single day are the people that document that part of the plan. I can do the logistics. You tell me what you need, I can make it happen. But I can't tell you how to run your business that way, because the only person who can do that is the person who does it every single day. So that's how, and I will tell you there are 2 ways to do business continuity and disaster recovery planning, okay? One way is to just check the box, all right? So the auditors come in and everybody smiles and shakes their head and says, yep, they have a great plan, okay? And the second way, And that way, the real business continuity plan is keep your resume up to date, because if you have a disaster, it isn't happening, all right? To do it for real, to actually do it for real, you have to get commitment across the organization at all different levels. And so before I've taken a job with other companies, I've asked that question: how serious are you? How serious are you about actually having something that works? Because I'm not a big fan of building something that doesn't work. Not everybody needs a Cadillac version of recovery. Not everybody needs to do replication and, you know, all this other stuff, right? But it has to work when it happens for real. And in order for it to work when it happens for real, I need one person at least from every functional area of the company to participate in the planning process, and then I need leadership to participate in the incident management side of it. And if that's not what you want to do, if you just want to check the box, you're hiring the wrong person, all right? It is really easy to fake it in this business. The reason I got the job that I have today is because there was an open item with the audit committee of the board for 3 years before I got hired that hadn't been closed, all right? And it took me 2 weeks of being at the organization to figure out what was wrong. And what needed to be done to fix it. And again, it's how serious are you, all right? But let me tell you the questions I could have asked Cambia at that time before I took over. So you got a disaster recovery program? Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay, so they have one data center. So at that time, one data center. So you have a place to recover your data. So, oh yes, I have a contract with IBM. Spent $1 million a year on a contract with IBM to recover my data center. Oh great, okay. So you have a contract, you have a place to go. So do you test it? Oh, absolutely. I test it once a year. I go to IBM and I test bringing up my systems once a year. Oh, isn't that great? Okay, so and I check that box. Well, your test successful? Well, yeah, of course. What I test is successful. Of course it is, right? Absolutely. It's successful. Okay, but you didn't ask me the right question. You know what the right question is? So are you recoverable? Well, no, but I spend $1 million a year and I test and I have a site. Doesn't that count? No, it doesn't count. I will tell you that the recovery strategy they had in place at that time wouldn't have recovered them within any time frame that would have made their business live, right? And so my conversation with the board of directors, with the president in the room was, this is what we need to do to fix it, and this is why, and let me explain how it happens. They were actually still doing tape-based recovery. I said, so all right, let me explain how this works, okay? So we have a disaster, we call IBM, say, hey, we're coming, and we actually call our tape vendor, and we have them pack in tape boxes roughly, I don't know, 30,000 tapes, okay? And I want you to know they don't have that many tape boxes, all right? But we're going to pretend that they do, or they find a way to secure them, and then they have to take those tape boxes and they have to drive them from, the location where the data center is or where the offsite storage is to the recovery data center, which is about a 6-hour ride, and you're assuming they're going to drive them there, okay? And then when they get there, they got to back the truck up to the loading dock, and they got to unload all of those tapes into the tape room, right? And then they have to rack them in vol-seer order, right? Number order, because when a system calls for tape 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if I don't put them in number order, I'm not finding that tape among the 30,000 tapes that I've got out there. And let's hope that none of these tapes have breakage, or no one drops them, or we forgot one, or any of that stuff. That all that stuff goes perfectly. But what they do incrementals, right? The last time they did a full backup was about 2 years ago. Okay, so 2 years we're going to lay down that backup, and then we're going to do every incremental we took every single day for the last 2 years, and hope that all those tapes are there, and none of them broke. And so I'm talking 45 to 60 days before you see your systems back. Is that okay with you? You put it in terms that they understand, they go, well, no. All right then. Well, if we want to fix that, we got to spend some money. Right? And this is the way we fix it. And we don't need a Cadillac for everything. We can have a couple Chevys and a lot of Yugos, but it's got to work when we need it. And that's what you have to talk to business people. Technology is a facilitator of the business, right? It's not the business into and of itself. And so you got to talk to the business people in terms that they understand, in business terms. And when you talk about technology, you have to do it in such a way. I mean, that wasn't exactly true. I mean, they had a tape management system, and it would have been, but from a standpoint of explaining it to them, that's what made them understand what the problem was and why we needed to spend some money to fix it. And so it's getting that conversation with them to convince them that this is the right thing to do if you want your business to survive.
Just to add to that, because one of the aspects of your question was it's hard to get funding for BCM programs, right? And so just to add to your comments, it's similar to what we're hearing from a security standpoint. It's hard to get the money because things are running, and unless there's a problem, nobody notices it, right? So one of the things that we've seen is looking at statistics, pure statistics. What are your peer companies doing? How much are they investing in this space, right? What kind of technologies do they have for security or backup or to perform their disaster recovery programs? And then secondly, yes, there's got to be a strong tone at the top and support from senior management, because without that, it is very difficult to roll out a program, because it's not just rolling out the technology, right, which is the enabler, it's rolling out a change in culture, and it's a change in how you're doing things.
It has to become part of the way you do business. And I will tell you, my senior leadership kind of bought into it a little bit when I got hired, but about a year and a half I was into this organization. We had an event that was actually at a vendor site, a key vendor, technology vendor, that lasted for 7 days. And I used the incident management structure I had built, because I get involved in every type of incident. Doesn't matter who owns the incident. I don't own a facility event. I don't own a technology event, okay? But I am the orchestrator, basically, when anything happens. And so during the course of this event, they got to see that incident management process and communication levels we built across the firm to go all the way down to the end user sitting at a desktop waiting for that system to come back up. So that everybody, the way people remember an event has absolutely nothing to do with how bad it was or how long it lasted or how many times we screwed up before we got it right. The way people remember an event is how well they were communicated to within their own space, so that they could make the right decisions in their own space, right? So they didn't get beat up. So they saw that whole incident management structure that I've been talking to them about for a year and a half in play. And that's when they really bought it. Was like, wow, I didn't have to, they didn't have to come from the 15th floor down to try to manage this event, because it was being managed at all the right levels, and all the right people were getting the right communication at the right time for their space, and that's what they saw. And all of a sudden, it was like, wow, this is really cool. I like this, right? So there's nothing like a good disaster to get people's attention, but you really don't want to blow up your data center just to prove a point. But you can try to find something to embed yourself in the fabric of the organization, because it has to become part of your culture. And you change a culture one person at a time, but each person you change is exponential from there, right? So
one thing we did is we tied business continuity to the risk appetite process. So by asking really at the executive to get that buy-in from them, and also to establish, what is the appetite of the company? How much money do you want to spend? You cannot say we have absolutely no tolerance to disasters because you can't control them, but you can say, what is the acceptable level of downtime? Either by business unit, by asset line, by whether it's office or regional area. And by that process, we really got them to think about it. And sometimes they would look, well, what is our tolerance? Do we need to be up and running? We had one business unit that always said we need to be up and running in 10 minutes, which I can tell you was technically impossible at the time, despite what some people said. And then when we put it in more realistic terms to them and say, that could cost you X amount of dollars. Is that really tolerable? And the truth was they did not need to be up and running within 10 minutes. It ended up being a 6-hour time period, and we put a band-aided approach to it. But by asking senior management, are you okay if trading stops for X amount of time? If you have a deal going through or money being transferred, what is a tolerable downtime for that, an acceptable level? And then you get them thinking about it, and then they're more willing to attach a dollar value to it, because your priorities are established from that senior management, and that can trickle down. You can have sort of bottom up from the departments, what they're saying, or your individual business lines, but having the executive saying, this is what I'm putting pen to paper and saying, okay, this is the accepted tolerance, this is how we're going to respond to it. That helped us a lot.
Yep. Nobody wants to be not critical or non-essential. I will encourage you to stop using those words, because that scares people, particularly when the economy is in a downturn. Fortunately, it's going back up a little bit right now, but that will change, right? Because people think that if I'm non-critical or non-essential, that means the next time there's a layoff, I'm the first person out the door. The right word is time sensitive. How time sensitive is what you do? It's not about, because I will tell you, we don't hire people to do unimportant stuff. Everybody who has a job at my company is doing something important, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't have a job. We would have laid them off a long time ago. It's not about being important or critical. It's about being time sensitive. So, you know, I tell a story about, you know, when I worked for Fidelity, I was doing mid-range DR, and the general ledger system, you know, the thing that's like your checkbook, payables, receivables, ran on an AS400, all right? And I went to talk to the people that did the budgets for Fidelity and said, when do you need the system back up and running? And they said, oh, day one, got to have it back day one. I said, really? Well, you know what? I'm willing to build whatever recovery strategy you're willing to pay for. But let me ask you a question. You know, if we didn't run general ledger for a month, it would be ugly. Okay? There's no question we would have to cut manual checks to keep critical services, you know, pay the light bill, pay the phone bill, whatever, right? We'd have to have a manual ledger that we kept track of all the money that came in and the money that came out until GL was back up and running. And then I would hate to be the accountant that had to recover from, after a month of not having GL and having to reconcile the manual ledger to the general ledger. I would hate to do that. I would hate to do that. Okay, it would be ugly. But I think Fidelity Investments would survive as a business if we didn't run GL for 30 days. How long do you think they'd survive if they didn't answer their phone or price their funds? It's not that general ledger's unimportant. It's just that some things are more time sensitive than others. And you've got to get that whole critical, essential thing off the table. It's a dumb word. It scares people. Nobody wants to be not essential. It's how time sensitive are you? Yes?
Question back to the lady on my right, and then it kind of grew as the lady on my left started talking. So I actually work in our information security department, and you were talking about the challenge in getting funding for business continuity and how that's the same as information security. So we've done, we've used the approach of using risk discussions to get that funding. And then you were talking about how you were tying it to risk appetite. So I guess it's a couple questions. First of all, you said that you're using the recovery time objective to kind of talk about risk. Are you actually doing loss event frequency at all as far as how often you expect that event to happen, or are you simply focusing on the loss magnitude or how much that would cost to recover? And then second of all, I want to know if you guys really are kind of tying your risk assessments to your business continuity discussions to say, here's the top risks and the things that we would need to recover from, and have that risk group do the assessments to actually do that calculation for you.
So for the first part, so in terms of the risk assessments, our top risks, I would say, are a bit separate. We do have top risk in terms of, you know, reputational issues, ability. What we've seen is we're keeping them separate. We're doing more business impact analysis by business line, but that'll tie up at a higher level in terms of what is the appetite that was set. And that's been more successful in a way, because we've already identified what the company wants. It also helps streamline, because a lot of times business continuity as a whole didn't really have a good sense, maybe from the senior executives, what were they looking for? What were the areas that they were really focused on? And you know, that's a very good point. You said you don't answer the phones, you're not gonna look very good in the public eye, you're not gonna look very good for whoever ultimately you're reporting to, whether it's stakeholders, you know, we report into the government eventually down the road. So it was really through the BIAs that we did it, and then we came up with a corporate one that tied into the risk appetite, and that was what was presented to the board of directors. So they went all the way up to the board of directors to say, okay, this is what our plan is going to cover. These are the areas where we have, let's say, more tolerance, you know, to be that. Reputation factor was one that maybe individual business units aren't going to bring up, but when you bring in the executive, it's going to play a factor as well into potentially changing some areas. So maybe some ones that aren't as time sensitive, but because they have potential reputational issues attached to them, focus will be put on that as well, a bit like it is for cyber. So that was another area where having that senior management buy-in and actually going up to the board of directors to make sure, okay, this is what we agree upon. And we would have one board member who would constantly say, okay, what if there's like a nuclear war? And we're sort of like, it's a little unrealistic to think we're going to a data center at that point, right? But it was something they just kept bringing up until we kind of said, this is not something we're planning for, and they understood why to plan for that. We're not NASA, right? Do we even need to plan for such a type of an event as an example? And that really brought a really meaningful discussion to it, tying it back again to tolerance levels at the senior management level, using what the business lines have said, but again, adding some other factors, strategy, financial, reputational, that maybe individual departments aren't necessarily going to think of because they're thinking, again, am I critical, am I essential, et cetera.
And one of the things...
Did that answer your question? Did that answer your question?
And
I would just add one quick thing. Risk assessment is what you do to figure out where to spend your mitigating dollars to try to prevent something from happening, right? That's what you do a risk assessment for. You can't mitigate every risk. You can't. There's not enough money in the world to mitigate every single risk that's out there. But you do a risk assessment to determine what are the risks that are most likely to occur to you or will have the biggest impact to you. Business continuity is what you do when all else has failed. When all those mitigating strategies you put in place didn't work, and you've still got a disaster anyway. It's a different thing. Risk assessment and business continuity are both risk management things, but they're different in terms of their approach.
excellent. I was just going to say we're just about out of time, so maybe just 20 seconds each on recommendation as everybody leaves today and thinks about their BCM programs.
So one of the things I'll mention is it's really important to make sure that the definitions of what is a risk, how you categorize it, what processes it links to, what products it applies to, locations, et cetera, are aligned, that different strategic groups within the organization are aligned. So spending more time up front, thinking about the foundation, thinking about the definitions, the taxonomy. So when you're doing your risk assessment, when you're giving that data to the board, you're all speaking the same language. That can also help get the funding and help them understand exactly what the impacts are.
My last 2 cents are scare people. Talk to them about what really could happen and do exercises that are real. If I ever did an exercise where 2 planes flew in a building across the street from me and, I would have been laughed out of the room, it has to be something that they believe will actually happen. And because you're risk managers, going out and understanding the risks that your organization could face and using that as the basis of an exercise brings it home to people. Brings it home about the need for preparedness. So I told you, my job really is to scare people into taking action and being prepared within their own space, whether it's an individual at their home or it's the company as a whole. It's about making sure they understand what's out there and what we need to do to protect ourselves.
I would say try as much as possible to tie it into other things, whether it's risk appetite, assessments. If you're implementing a major new project or system, have that portion of, is this something we want to have recovered? Is this something that is going to be time sensitive later on at the onset? So it's already built into your planning and your budget. Bringing it more in the day-to-day. And also looking, if you don't have great buy-in, look at what your peers or other like companies are doing so that you can give them a comparative analysis. Maybe not everyone's going to share exactly their budget they're spending on BCM, but they might say how many people on the team, what type of solutions have they put in place. If all your peers have secondary sites or emergency notification tools and your company doesn't, that's a very good way to also get buy-in. And lastly, at the board or senior management reporting, I would say be transparent. It's impossible to say we're fine, we're going to be recoverable. If you have testing and you haven't found something, it's because you probably haven't tested enough. And I would say to senior management and the board, we want to find things because that's how we'll improve and be able to have it embedded more within the business line. And be transparent that there's absolutely impossible, as we said, to plan or pay for every scenario. But what you can is have, as much as you can, the necessary tools that'll cross over as much as possible and be able there to assist you.
Yep, test, test, test. If we knew it all worked, we wouldn't bother to test it. The reason we test is to find out what doesn't work so we can fix it before it happens for real. So test, test, test.
Well, thank you to our panelists, and thank you for everyone for your time this evening. Looking forward to the evening's events. So thank you very much again, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.